This story is titled, I accidentally discovered my wife secretly transferred our house to her name. When she filed for divorce, I was ready, and now she's begging me to drop charges as she and her new man face fraud imprisonment. Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be sharing this story online, but after seeing another guy's post about his cheating wife, I figured it was time to tell my tale. My name is Marcus, and I'm 31 years old. Fair warning, this is going to be a long one, but I promise the payoff is worth it. I've been working construction since I was fresh out of high school. Started as a basic laborer, busting my ass, carrying heavy materials around the site, and learning the trade from the ground up. These days, I'm a site supervisor running crews of 20-plus guys and managing multi-million-dollar projects. It's not exactly tech industry money, but I make enough to live comfortably and still have plenty left for my gym membership and my pride and joy, a restored '67 Mustang. Yeah, I know, I'm that typical muscle car guy, but hey, everyone needs a hobby, right? Let me paint you a picture of my ex-wife, Vanessa. Imagine that stereotypical hot brunette realtor. Perfect makeup that never seems to smudge, tight pencil skirts that probably cost more than my work boots, and a $1 million smile that could close a deal before she even started her pitch. That was Vanessa. We met at this dive bar when I was 25. I was there with my crew after finishing a big project, still in my work boots and covered in construction dust from a long day at the site. She was there with her fancy real estate friends, slumming it for fun on what they probably considered an adventure to see how the other half lives. Somehow, don't ask me how, we hit it off. Maybe it was the way I didn't try desperately to impress her like every other guy in the place. I just was myself, a straightforward dude who could deadlift 500 pounds and knew how to frame a house from foundation to roof. For whatever reason, she dug it. We dated for 2 years before getting married. Her daddy, this big-shot real estate developer, who always looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his Italian leather shoes, insisted on a prenup. I didn't give a shit about that at the time. I wasn't marrying her for money anyway. I signed it without even reading it carefully. Spoiler alert. This comes back to bite her in the ass later, which is probably the sweetest irony in this whole story. About 3 years ago, we bought this sweet apartment in the nice part of Chicago. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, corner unit with a view of the city that would make those Instagram influencers drool. Most of the down payment came from my grandpa's inheritance. The old man was a wise dude who always told me, Marcus, keep some money hidden away from the wife. You never know when you'll need it. I should have listened to more of his advice, but at least the inheritance thing worked out in the end. Life was pretty good for a while. I was killing it at work, got promoted to supervisor, and started making real money. Vanessa's real estate business was booming too. She specialized in those fancy downtown condos and was making fat commissions that kept her designer wardrobe constantly refreshed. We had our routines like any married couple. I'd hit the gym at 5 a.m. before work. She'd do her yoga or Pilates or whatever trendy workout she was into that month. We'd sometimes meet for lunch when I wasn't stuck at a job site. Normal married life stuff that you take for granted until it's gone. Even our arguments seemed normal at the time. She'd complain about my gym schedule being too rigid. I'd get annoyed when she'd spend 3 hours getting ready to go out for dinner. Sometimes she'd complain that I was too focused on work or that I didn't understand her creative side. Whatever the hell that means. But nothing major, you know? Nothing that made me think she was planning what came next. The first real red flag popped up about 6 months ago. Vanessa suddenly got super into these women's empowerment seminars. Every other weekend, she'd dress up in these fancy business outfits. We're talking full-power suits and heels that probably cost more than my weekly paycheck, and head off to network with other powerful women or some shit like that. She started talking constantly about finding herself and unlocking her potential in this way that felt rehearsed, like she was repeating something she'd heard rather than expressing her own thoughts. Looking back now, these seminars were probably where she met the people who helped her plan everything that came next. Then she got weirdly interested in our apartment paperwork. Like, really interested. She started asking about the deed, the mortgage, all that boring legal stuff that most people try to forget about after closing day. I didn't think much of it at the time. She was a realtor after all, and property documents were literally her thing. Plus, I was busy with this huge commercial project we had just landed. I was pulling 12-hour days managing multiple crews and dealing with city inspectors who seemed determined to find problems with everything we built. I didn't have the energy to wonder why my wife suddenly cared so much about our refinancing options when she'd never shown interest before. The really weird shit started one night after I got back from the gym. I was still in my workout clothes, feeling pretty good after hitting a new personal record on bench press. Vanessa was waiting on the couch, laptop open, looking all professional in her work clothes even though it was around 8 p.m. and she'd been home for hours. "Babe," she said, all sweet and innocent in that tone I'd come to recognize as her "I want something" voice. "I've been looking at our mortgage rates. I think we should refinance." Now, Vanessa never called me babe unless she wanted something from me. Usually, it was about buying some expensive furniture that would be impossible to keep clean, or guilting me into going to one of her work events where I'd stand around awkwardly while her colleagues pretended to be interested in construction. But this was different. This felt calculated in a way her usual requests didn't. "My credit score is better than yours," she continued, showing me some numbers on her laptop screen as if I could make sense of the financial charts she'd pulled up. "If we put it under just my name, we could save like $200 a month on payments." I remember sitting there, still sweaty from my workout, something feeling decidedly off in my gut. When I asked about my name being on the deed, a reasonable question any homeowner would ask, she waved it off like it was nothing. "Oh, we can add you back later. It's just a technical thing for the bank," she said dismissively. Then she looked me straight in the eyes and asked, "You trust me, right?" That last line, that's what set off the alarm bells ringing in my head. Vanessa was always direct, always a straight shooter in our relationship. This sweet, manipulative approach wasn't her style at all. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. But I didn't let on that I suspected anything. 8 years of working construction teaches you how to keep a poker face when the client is being unreasonable or when the architect shows up with impossible changes. I just nodded, said we'd look into it, and went to take a shower. But my mind was already racing, pieces starting to come together like one of those complex framing projects where you suddenly see how all the supports connect. The seminars, the late nights at open houses that never seemed to end at a reasonable hour, the weird phone calls she'd take in another room, speaking in hushed tones that stopped the moment I walked in. Something was definitely off, and I needed to figure out what before I found myself without a home. This is where things start getting really weird. Those women's empowerment seminars Vanessa had been attending? Well, I started doing some digging. I called up my buddy Tommy from the construction site. His sister is big into that whole female entrepreneurship scene, so I figured he might know something. Turns out these weren't your typical girl boss workshops, teaching women how to start businesses or negotiate salaries. They were these exclusive financial freedom meetings run by this shady life coach named Jennifer. Her big thing? Teaching women how to secure their financial independence during divorce, which is basically a polite way of saying how to take your husband for everything he's worth before he knows what hit him. Yeah, real classy stuff. But I didn't know any of this yet. I was still playing dumb, going about my routine like nothing was wrong. Wake up at 4:30 a.m., hit the gym for my morning workout, work my ass off all day at the construction site, and come home to my increasingly distant wife. The woman I'd married, who used to greet me with a kiss and ask about my day, now barely looked up from her phone when I walked through the door. Vanessa was getting bolder with each passing day. She started coming home later and later from her open houses, always armed with some excuse that sounded rehearsed. "Oh, the clients wanted to see the house at sunset for the perfect lighting," she'd say. Or, "The paperwork took longer than expected." Or my personal favorite, "Had to network with some new clients." These explanations might have fooled me before, but now that my suspicions were raised, each excuse sounded more hollow than the last. One night she came home smelling like expensive cologne, not the kind I wear, not even close. I'm more of a basic Old Spice guy, the same scent I've used since high school. This was that fancy shit that costs more than my weekly grocery budget, the kind that announces "I have money" before the wearer even opens his mouth. When I casually mentioned the scent, she got immediately defensive, her eyes widening slightly before she controlled her expression. "It's probably from the house I was showing," she said too quickly. "The owners have one of those fancy automatic sprayer things." Sure, Vanessa. And I'm secretly Batman with a cave under our building. But I just nodded like I believed her and changed the subject. I was gathering information, and the more she thought I was oblivious, the more careless she would become. The real kicker came about a week after that refinancing conversation. I was at this new job site downtown, overseeing the foundation work on this luxury condo building that had already gone over budget 3 times before we even broke ground. My concrete guy Tommy, who's been with me since my first supervisor gig, comes up to me looking uncomfortable as hell, like he'd rather be anywhere else than having this conversation. "Hey Marcus, you might want to see this," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to another. He pulled out his phone, hesitated for a moment, then handed it over. On the screen was a photo his girlfriend had taken at this fancy restaurant called Le Rouge, or some pretentious French name like that. There, captured in perfect high definition, was Vanessa. She was all dressed up in a tight black dress I definitely didn't buy her, one I'd never even seen before, sitting real cozy with this guy in what had to be a $1,000 suit. They weren't exactly looking at property listings, if you catch my drift. His hand was on hers, and she was laughing in that way she used to laugh at my jokes during our first year together. Turns out Mr. Fancy Suit was Brian Thompson, one of the top divorce lawyers in the city. Real piece of work, this guy. The kind who advertises on billboards with slogans like, "Make your ex pay," and "Get what you deserve." Later I found out he charges like $500 an hour for the privilege of his services. Must be nice to make that kind of money just for helping break apart marriages. I didn't confront Vanessa right away. Remember, I'm playing the long game here. Instead, I started watching more carefully, documenting everything. I noticed she'd changed all her phone passwords, the same passwords she'd never bothered to hide from me before. She started doing her laundry separately, probably trying to hide that fancy cologne smell that lingered on her clothes. She even started going to the gym herself, which might have been a positive change if not for the fact that she didn't join my gym. Oh no, she joined some expensive fitness club downtown, right next to Brian's office. Real subtle, Vanessa. The apartment refinancing stuff was getting more intense, too. She'd leave paperwork accidentally visible on the kitchen counter. Mortgage rates, deed transfers, all that boring legal shit that most people hire someone else to handle. One day I came home early from work because of a rain delay. You can't pour concrete in a downpour no matter what the project timeline says, and caught her on the phone in what she thought was an empty apartment. "Yes, I understand. No, he doesn't suspect anything," she was saying in that professional voice she used with important clients. "The transfer should be clean. I have all his information." There was a pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end. Then came the kicker. "Yes, I can handle the signature." She hung up real quick when she saw me standing in the doorway, tried to play it off like she was talking to a client about a routine closing. But I'd heard enough. The moment she disappeared into the shower, I called up my buddy Jack, the lawyer. You'll hear more about him soon, but let's just say he's about to become the MVP in this whole disaster. The next few weeks were like living in some kind of twisted reality show. Vanessa was acting sweet as pie to my face, while I knew she was planning to screw me over in the worst way possible. She'd cook my favorite meals, ask about my day with feigned interest, even started showing interest in my gym routine after years of complaining about how much time I spent there. Classic guilty behavior from someone who thinks they're getting away with something big. Then came the day she dropped the refinancing bomb. I'm sitting there watching the game, a rare Sunday off when I didn't have to check on any job sites, and she comes bouncing in all excited like she'd just closed on a multi-million-dollar property. "Babe, great news!" she exclaimed with fake enthusiasm. "I handled all the refinancing stuff. You don't have to worry about anything." I looked up from the TV, playing dumb like I'd been doing for weeks. "Oh yeah? Did I need to sign something for that?" I asked innocently. She hesitated for just a second. I would have missed it if I wasn't specifically looking for it. "Nope. Did it all digital. Technology these days, right? Amazing." The next week, she started talking about selling the apartment. Just casually dropped it into conversation, like she was suggesting we try a new restaurant. "The market's really hot right now," she said, while flipping through a magazine, not making eye contact. "We could make a killing if we sell now." Notice how it went from refinancing to selling real quick? Almost like she had a plan or something. A plan that involved getting the property in her name, selling it fast, and disappearing with the money before I could figure out what happened. I kept playing along, nodding and making non-committal sounds about looking into it. But I was already 10 steps ahead. I had Jack looking into everything. The forged signatures, the financing documents, the prenup violations. I even hired a private investigator to follow her and Brian around, documenting their meetings and collecting evidence. Worth every penny of what it cost me, let me tell you. The whole time, Vanessa was getting cockier, more careless. She started staying out later, barely bothering with excuses anymore. She'd come home at 11 p.m. with her lipstick smudged and just mutter something about client dinners running long. She even started leaving some of Brian's fancy law firm documents accidentally, mixed in with her real estate paperwork documents that, by the way, showed she was already looking at luxury condos. Single occupancy ones, as in condos with no space for a husband who works construction. Subtle. But here's the thing about being a construction supervisor. You learn to spot when a foundation's weak, when a building isn't going to stand up to pressure. And Vanessa? She'd built her little plan on the shakiest foundation possible. She just didn't know it yet. Now let me tell you about Jack, the guy who turned out to be my secret weapon in all of this. See, Jack isn't your typical lawyer dude with slicked back hair and custom Italian suits. He looks more like a bouncer than an attorney. Ex-military, built like a tank with this crazy scar above his right eye from his UFC amateur days before he decided knocking people out wasn't as satisfying as destroying them in court. I met him at my gym, actually. Spotted him on bench press one day and got to talking during our rest periods. Turns out he specialized in divorce law and, get this, fraud cases. Talk about perfect timing. When I first showed Jack what I had, the refinancing papers, the recordings of sketchy phone calls, Tommy's photo of Vanessa and Brian, he just sat there for a minute, cracking his knuckles with this weird smile on his face that probably terrifies opposing counsel. "Marcus," he said finally, "your wife isn't just planning to divorce you. She's trying to pull off a classic property fraud scheme." He leaned forward, his expression darkening. "And her boyfriend? He's done this before." Turns out Brian Thompson had a bit of a reputation in legal circles. Jack pulled up some sealed records. Don't ask me how he got access to those. Showing 3 other cases where wives mysteriously got their houses transferred to their names right before filing for divorce. All of them were Brian's clients. All of them used the same method-forged signatures, rush transfers, quick sales before the husband could figure out what was happening. But here's the kicker. None of those houses had prenups like ours did. Vanessa and Brian had picked the wrong mark this time. Jack's first move? He hired this badass PI named Maria. Ex-cop, takes no shit from anyone. The kind of woman who could probably break both your arms while explaining exactly which statutes you violated. She started following Vanessa and Brian, building a paper trail that would eventually bury them both. Within a week, she had enough dirt to write a true crime novel. She got photos of their meetings at his private gym. Yeah, that's where Vanessa was really working out, doing a different kind of cardio than she claimed. Maria captured audio recordings from their lunch meetings, where they openly discussed the property transfer and how they'd split the money. She somehow got copies of emails they thought were deleted. Pro tip: nothing's ever really deleted in the digital age. She even got security camera footage from Brian's office building showing Vanessa visiting at weird hours that had nothing to do with real estate consultations. Even more damning, Maria uncovered bank records showing Vanessa had opened a secret account and was steadily moving money into it. Our money, from our joint accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger transfers as she got bolder. But the real gold? Maria caught them on video at some fancy hotel downtown, planning out the whole scheme in detail. Full audio, crystal clear HD video, everything a prosecutor could dream of. There's Vanessa in her fancy realtor outfit, sitting with Brian going over documents, talking about how they'd sell the apartment quick and split before I knew what hit me. The best part? They were so cocky about it, so certain I was too stupid to catch on. Here's an actual quote from Brian's mouth that Maria captured. "Once it's in your name, he can't do shit. These construction guys never read the fine print. Joke's on you, Brian. I might work with my hands, but I'm not stupid. I can read blueprints that would make your lawyer brain explode, and I sure as hell can spot when I'm being set up." While all this was going down, I had to keep playing dumb at home. Vanessa was getting bolder by the day, taking less care to hide her tracks. She started working late 3-4 times a week, coming home with shopping bags from stores I know we can't afford on my salary alone. She even bought herself a new BMW, claiming it was a company car when I asked about it. Yeah, right. Last I checked, most realtors don't get $80,000 vehicles as standard work perks. One morning, I'm at the job site checking the electrical work when I get this call from my bank. Some lady from the fraud department, wanting to verify a transfer authorization I supposedly made. Apparently, Vanessa had tried to move our entire savings account, over $50,000, to a new account in just her name. Thank God I'd already moved most of our savings to a separate account Jack had me set up weeks earlier. She managed to transfer about $5,000 before the bank's security protocols flagged it as suspicious. But here's where Vanessa fucked up real bad. Remember that prenup her daddy insisted on? The one I signed without reading carefully because I wasn't marrying her for money? Jack found this beautiful little clause buried in the legal language. In the event that either party attempts to transfer, hide, or otherwise deceive about marital assets, they forfeit all claims to shared property and any potential alimony. Basically, by trying to steal the apartment through fraud, Vanessa violated the very prenup her own father had put in place to protect her. The irony is just chef's kiss. Perfect. Her father's attempt to protect her from the gold-digging construction worker ended up being the very thing that would bring her down. Jack was building a massive case file against Vanessa and Brian. We're talking a 3-inch thick binder full of evidence, photos, bank statements, audio transcripts, property records, everything. But we kept sitting on it, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Why? Because Vanessa and Brian were getting sloppy. The more confident they got in their plan, the more mistakes they made, and we wanted to document every single one. They started meeting openly at this fancy wine bar downtown, not even bothering to be discreet anymore. One of my crew guys even spotted them making out in Brian's Porsche in the parking lot of a restaurant where his girlfriend worked as a server. Real classy behavior from a supposedly professional attorney and his realtor girlfriend, both supposedly still married to other people. Maria, the PI, got photos of everything. She documented Vanessa going into his house in the evenings and not leaving until morning. She captured them shopping for furniture together for that condo they were planning to move into after selling my apartment out from under me. She even caught them looking at rings one day at some high-end jewelry store. Guess Brian was planning to upgrade wives once the divorce was finalized. Though something tells me he wasn't planning to be any more faithful to Vanessa than he was to his current wife. Then one day I'm at the gym doing deadlifts, trying to focus on my form rather than the rage building inside me, when my phone buzzes with a text from Maria. They're meeting with a document forger, getting it all on video. Sure enough, Vanessa and Brian had hired some sketchy dude to forge my signature on the property transfer documents. This wasn't just some guy with decent handwriting. This was a professional forger who specialized in legal documents and charged accordingly. Cost them 10 grand in cash, which Maria caught them handing over in an envelope. She got the whole exchange on high-definition video, including the part where Brian explicitly explains exactly how they're going to file the fraudulent paperwork with the county recorder's office. The next day, Vanessa comes home all excited, practically bouncing around the apartment like she'd won the lottery. "Babe, remember that refinancing stuff? It's all done," she exclaimed, her eyes bright with what I now recognized as greed rather than affection. "The apartment's secure now?" I just nodded, said, "That's great," and went back to my protein shake, pretending to be more interested in my post-workout nutrition than her announcement. Inside, though, I was laughing my ass off, because while she thought she was securing the apartment for herself, what she was actually doing was building the perfect case against herself. Every forged document, every fraudulent filing, every secret meeting, it was all evidence that would eventually bury her and her fancy lawyer boyfriend. Jack called me that night, his voice filled with the kind of satisfaction that only comes from knowing you've got someone dead to rights. "Marcus, we got everything we need," he said. "And brother, it's beautiful. When do you want to drop the hammer on them?" "Let's wait just a little longer," I told him. "I want to see if they'll try to sell the place before we move. That'll add attempted grand theft to the fraud charges." It was a Tuesday morning when shit finally hit the fan. I remember because I was at the construction site early, dealing with some supply chain bullshit that had been plaguing our industry since the pandemic. We had 3 trucks of wrong-sized lumber delivered, subcontractors arguing about timeline changes, and city inspectors breathing down my neck about some permit technicality. Typical Tuesday chaos that normally would have stressed me out, but compared to my home life, work problems seemed almost refreshingly straightforward. That's when Vanessa sends me this text. "We need to talk when you get home. It's important." I knew what was coming. Jack had already warned me. His PI had spotted Vanessa picking up paperwork from Brian's office the day before. Divorce papers, obviously. Still, knowing it's coming and actually seeing it happen, two very different things, especially when it's the end of an 8-year relationship. I get home that evening, and Vanessa's got her serious business face on. Hair done perfect, makeup flawless, wearing this tight black dress I'd never seen before. Probably bought it with Brian on one of their shopping trips. She was sitting at our kitchen table with a manila envelope in front of her, arranged like a prop in a movie scene. "Marcus," she says, all quiet and serious, like she's about to tell me someone died. "I think we need to make some changes." I just stood there, still in my work boots and high-vis vest, covered in construction dust from the day's work. I didn't say a word, just let her dig her own grave deeper and deeper with every rehearsed line she delivered. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued when I didn't respond, fidgeting slightly with the edge of the envelope. "And I just don't think this marriage is working anymore. We've grown apart. You're so focused on your construction work, and I'm really expanding in my career." The nerve of this woman. 8 years together, and she's acting like my blue-collar job is suddenly beneath her now. Like my career supporting us while she built her client base was just some unfortunate phase she had to endure. Meanwhile, she's planning to steal my apartment. The apartment bought largely with my grandfather's inheritance money, and run off with a scumbag lawyer who's already married to someone else. "I think we need to separate," she said, sliding the envelope across the table like she was closing a real estate deal. "I've already drawn up the paperwork. It's very fair." She paused, watching for my reaction. When I gave her nothing, she continued with the part she'd clearly been most excited to deliver. "I get the apartment since it's in my name now," she stated, unable to completely hide the smugness in her voice. "And you can keep your truck and your gym equipment." How generous of her, right? She steals our apartment through fraud, a property worth close to $1 million in the current market, and thinks letting me keep my Ford F-150 and some dumbbells makes it fair. The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh out loud, but here's where it gets good. She starts laying out her whole plan, thinking she's got me cornered and completely helpless against her scheme. She had no idea what was coming her way. "I've already listed the apartment. There's a lot of interest," she said, scrolling through her phone to show me some messages from potential buyers. "We could close within a week after the divorce is finalized." She paused dramatically before adding, "Once it sells, I'll give you 10% of the proceeds." That's more than fair considering. I cut her off mid-sentence. "Considering what?" She actually flinched at my interruption. It was probably the first time I'd interrupted her rehearsed little script, and it momentarily threw her off balance. "Well, considering the apartment's in my name legally," she said, regaining her composure and emphasizing the word legally as if that made her fraud somehow legitimate. "I don't have to give you anything, really." I just looked at her for a long moment, watching her squirm slightly under my gaze. Then I said, "Okay, we'll meet in court," and walked out, leaving her sitting there with her mouth half open, clearly expecting tears or begging or anger, anything but this calm acceptance. I went to stay at my friend Tommy's house that night, ignoring the barrage of increasingly panicked texts from Vanessa. She started with indignation. "Fine, be that way." Moved to guilt. "After everything I've done for you." Then to threats. "My lawyer will destroy you." And finally to fake concern. "Are you okay? I'm worried about you." I didn't respond to any of them. The time for talking was over. The court date was set for a Thursday morning 3 weeks later. I had to request a rare day off from the job site, which my boss was cool about once I explained the situation. I showed up in my best suit. Yeah, I own exactly one suit. Got it for my wedding, ironically enough. I made sure to get a fresh haircut and looked as clean and respectable as possible, despite having been at the job site since 5 a.m. doing inspections before heading to court. My boy Jack was there early, looking like he was about to enjoy Christmas morning. He had 3 massive binders of evidence stacked on our table, each one meticulously organized and tabbed for easy reference. The man was nothing if not thorough. Then Vanessa walks in and holy shit, she's wearing this all-white designer pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her hair and makeup were perfect, as always, complemented by designer heels and a handbag that cost more than most people's rent. She had this smug little smile on her face, the expression of someone who thought they'd already won. Brian walked in right behind her, looking every bit the shark that he was in a suit that practically screamed, "I bill $500 an hour." His perfectly styled hair and manicured nails were a stark contrast to my calloused hands and the one tiny nick I'd gotten while shaving that morning. He had the confident swagger of a man who smells blood in the water and is moving in for the kill. The judge was this older lady, probably in her 60s, with these reading glasses that made her look like a stern librarian. She started going through the preliminary details of the case, reviewing the basic facts before us. And then Brian stands up, all confident and smooth like he was about to close the easiest deal of his career. "Your Honor, this is a simple case," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "The apartment in question is solely in my client's name. Mr. Wilson has no legal claim to the property. We're willing to be generous and offer him his personal belongings and vehicle, but the apartment and its equity clearly belong to Mrs. Wilson." I glanced over at Vanessa, who had that little smirk still playing at the corners of her mouth. She was probably already planning how she was going to spend the money from selling my apartment, maybe picking out furniture for her new place with Brian. That's when Jack stands up, and I swear I see him wink at me. "Your Honor," he says, all casual, like we're just having a beer at the gym after a workout. "Before we proceed, I have some evidence I'd like to present regarding the property transfer in question." Brian waves his hand dismissively, like Jack is some annoying fly he's trying to swat away. "The property transfer is complete and legal. All paperwork was properly filed with the county recorder's office." Jack's smile gets bigger, almost predatory. "Oh, I'm very interested in that paperwork, particularly in how it was filed." He turns to the judge. "Your Honor, may I approach?" The judge nods and Jack starts laying out photos on her bench. With each photo he places before her, I watch Vanessa's face get paler and paler, the smug confidence draining away as she realizes what's happening. "These photos, Your Honor, show Mrs. Wilson and her associate Mr. Thompson meeting with a known document forger on March 15th, Jack explains calmly. "We have video evidence of the entire transaction, including the exchange of $10,000 in cash for forged signatures on property transfer documents." Brian jumps up, his face flushed with anger or panic, probably both. "Objection! These photos could be anything. They prove nothing without context." The judge peers over her glasses at him with obvious disdain. "Mr. Thompson, sit down. I'd like to hear this. Jack's just getting started." He pulls out a USB drive with the air of a magician about to perform his best trick. "Your Honor, we have audio recordings of Mrs. Wilson and Mr. Thompson planning this entire scheme. Would you like to hear Mrs. Wilson explicitly discussing how to forge her husband's signature? Or perhaps Mr. Thompson advising her on how to hide assets before filing for divorce?" By this point, Vanessa is visibly shaking, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as she grips the edge of the table. Brian's tugging at his collar like it's suddenly too tight, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the courtroom's air conditioning. But Jack is just warming up. He pulls out another file with a flourish. "Additionally, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Thompson has engaged in this exact scheme before. 3 previous cases, all following the same pattern. Wives mysteriously getting property transferred to their names through forged signatures right before filing for divorce, all with Mr. Thompson as their attorney of record." The judge takes off her glasses, and holy shit, if looks could kill, Brian would be 6 feet under. Her expression has transformed from professional neutrality to barely contained fury. "Mr. Thompson," she says, her voice cold as ice, "are you aware that facilitating fraud is grounds for disbarment in this state?" Brian starts stammering something about unfounded allegations and circumstantial evidence, but the judge cuts him off with a sharp wave of her hand. "And Mrs. Wilson," she continues, turning her glacial stare to Vanessa, "are you aware that forging signatures on property documents is a federal offense that carries substantial prison time?" Vanessa stands up abruptly, probably thinking she can charm her way out of this situation like she's done with everything else in her life. "Your Honor, there's been a misunderstanding." Jack interrupts her, and I can't help but love this guy more with every passing minute. "Oh, we're just getting to the good part, Your Honor," he says with undisguised glee. "I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit C, the prenuptial agreement that both parties signed before their marriage." Vanessa freezes mid-sentence. Brian looks confused, his brow furrowing as he glances at Vanessa. I guess he never actually read that prenup she told him was irrelevant. Section 7, Paragraph 3, Jack reads aloud from the document, clearly states that any attempt to fraudulently transfer or hide marital assets results in immediate forfeiture of all claims to shared property and requires the offending party to pay all legal fees associated with discovery of said fraud. The judge is reading along with her own copy, nodding slowly. I see. And this prenup was properly executed with witnesses and notarization? Yes, Your Honor, Jack confirms with a satisfied smile. Ironically, it was Mrs. Wilson's father who insisted on it to protect his daughter's interests. That's when Vanessa completely loses it. Just completely and utterly loses control of herself in the middle of the courtroom. She starts screaming about how I set her up, how this isn't fair, how she deserves the apartment after putting up with me for 8 years. Brian's desperately trying to shut her up, grabbing at her arm and whispering urgently, but she's way beyond listening to anyone at this point. He tricked me, she shrieks, mascara starting to run down her perfectly made-up face in black streaks. He knew I was seeing Brian. He had us followed. The judge bangs her gavel so hard I'm surprised it doesn't crack. Mrs. Wilson, control yourself or you will be held in contempt of court, she warns. But Vanessa's too far gone to hear the warning in the judge's tone. She spins around, pointing an accusatory finger directly at me from across the courtroom. You bastard! You planned this! You and your meathead lawyer! Jack just stands there grinning like the cat that ate the canary. Your Honor, I'd like to note for the record that Mrs. Wilson just admitted to the extramarital affair in open court, he says calmly, which, according to Section 4 of the prenup, is another violation that triggers penalties. The judge has clearly had enough of this spectacle. Order! She shouts, banging her gavel again. Mr. Thompson, given the evidence presented and your apparent involvement in this fraud scheme, I'm referring this matter to the Bar Association for disciplinary review. She turns her stern gaze to Vanessa, who has collapsed back into her chair, crying for real now as her carefully constructed world crumbles around her. Mrs. Wilson, this court finds your actions not only reprehensible but potentially criminal. The property transfer is hereby nullified effective immediately. Brian's already packing up his briefcase, probably racing to call his own lawyer. He knows he's in serious trouble, the kind that ends careers and possibly leads to criminal charges. But the judge isn't finished with either of them. Vanessa's still having her meltdown in court, mascara completely ruined now, her designer white suit looking considerably less pristine than when she walked in. Brian looks like he's about to vomit in his $1,000 loafers as the full legal implications of what he's done start to sink in. The judge takes off her glasses, setting them deliberately on the bench, and looks straight at Vanessa with undisguised contempt. Mrs. Wilson, this court rarely sees such a blatant attempt at fraud, she says, her voice stern and unyielding. The evidence presented here today shows not just deception, but a calculated scheme to defraud both your husband and this court. Vanessa tries to pull herself together, futilely attempting to fix her mascara with shaking hands. Brian's already edging toward the door, but the judge cuts that escape plan short. Mr. Thompson, sit down. We're not finished, she orders sharply, and he sinks back into his chair like a scolded child. Then she starts listing off everything they're going to face as a result of their scheme, ticking off each point on her fingers like she's reading a prison sentence, which, in a way, she is. 1. The apartment transfer is completely void, as if it never happened, she begins. 2. Mrs. Wilson has violated the prenuptial agreement in 3 different ways: fraud, adultery, and hiding assets, which triggers the penalties outlined in that agreement. 3. She's responsible for all legal fees associated with this case. She glances at Jack, who's still standing there with a satisfied grin. And I'm sure Mr. Wilson's attorney doesn't come cheap. Jack gives a modest shrug that fools absolutely no one. 4, the judge continues, I am referring this entire case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges against both Mrs. Wilson and Mr. Thompson. But here's where it gets even better. Remember how I mentioned Brian's wife earlier? Well, guess who walks into the courtroom right at this moment, timing her entrance like she's in a movie. This absolute smoke show of a woman in a perfectly tailored red dress strides purposefully down the center aisle, looking like she's about to commit murder and get away with it based on her appearance alone. It's Mrs. Thompson, Olivia, Brian's wife, who he apparently forgot about while planning his new life with my soon-to-be ex. Brian goes white as a sheet when he sees her, like literally looks like he's seen a ghost. Vanessa's just sitting there, mascara-streaked face twisted in confusion, watching her perfect little plan implode in spectacular fashion. Olivia walks right up to Brian with the confidence of a woman who knows exactly what she's doing. She drops a manila envelope on the table in front of him and says, loud enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear, "You've been served, honey. I've got all the evidence." The judge, who's apparently enjoying this show as much as everyone else in the courtroom, just sits back and watches the drama unfold. Brian opens the envelope with trembling hands, and I swear to God, he actually whimpers when he sees what's inside. Olivia's not done, though. She turns her attention to Vanessa, looking her up and down with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something unpleasant found on the bottom of a shoe. "By the way," she says coolly, "that Cartier bracelet he gave you? It was bought with our joint credit card. I want it back. Now." Vanessa starts fumbling with the bracelet on her wrist, the one I'd noticed a few weeks ago but hadn't said anything about, assuming it was yet another expensive purchase she'd made with money we didn't have. She practically rips it off and throws it at Olivia like it's suddenly burning her skin. That's when Brian finally finds his voice, though it's several octaves higher than his usual smooth lawyer tone. "Olivia, baby, this isn't what it looks like," he pleads, reaching for her arm. Olivia steps back from his touch like it's toxic. "Save it for your disciplinary hearing, Brian," she says icily. "The Bar Association is very interested in how many times you've pulled this property transfer scam." She turns to address the judge directly, the picture of composed professionalism despite the circumstances. "Your Honor, my attorney has uncovered 7 other cases where my husband helped wives fraudulently transfer property before divorce proceedings. 7 cases that follow this exact same pattern. My boy Jack had only found 3 such cases in his investigation. Turns out Olivia's lawyer was even more thorough. Or maybe she just had better access to Brian's records. Either way, the look on Brian's face is priceless as he realizes just how completely screwed he truly is. The judge clears her throat, drawing everyone's attention back to her. "Given these new developments, I'm adding a few items to my ruling," she says, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Vanessa's practically catatonic at this point, staring blankly at the wall, but Brian looks like he's calculating the distance to the exit and whether he could make it before the bailiff catches him. "First, Mr. Wilson is awarded full ownership of the apartment," the judge declares. "Mrs. Wilson forfeits all claims to any marital property due to her multiple violations of the prenuptial agreement." Vanessa starts sobbing again, but the judge continues without pause. "Second, Mrs. Wilson will be responsible for all legal fees and court costs associated with this case. Third, I'm issuing an injunction preventing her from selling or transferring any assets until the criminal investigation is complete." Then she turns her attention to Brian, who seems to physically shrink under her gaze. "Mr. Thompson, I'm reporting you to the Bar Association today. Given the pattern of behavior evidenced here and the new information Mrs. Thompson has provided, I expect your law license will be suspended pending investigation at minimum." Brian slumps in his chair, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. His whole life's imploding in real time. 8 years of running this scam, and it all comes crashing down because he picked the wrong guy's wife to screw over. Vanessa makes one last, desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her plans. She turns to me with those puppy dog eyes she used to use whenever she wanted something expensive, a new purse, a weekend trip to some resort, the latest iPhone. "Marcus, please," she pleads, her voice breaking. "We can work this out. I'll move back in. We can go to counseling." I just laugh. I can't help it. After everything she's done, after the weeks of deception and planning, after trying to steal my home and leave me with nothing, she thinks batting her eyelashes is going to make me forget it all? "Sorry, Vanessa," I reply. "Not sorry at all. I don't date criminals." That's when she completely loses it, like full psycho meltdown, the kind you see in movies but rarely witness in real life. She starts screaming about how I ruined her life, how she gave me the best years of her life, how she could have married a doctor or lawyer instead of wasting her time with me. I'm pretty sure she tried that last one, and look how well that turned out. The judge bangs her gavel again. "Officers, please remove Mrs. Wilson from my courtroom," she orders. 2 court officers have to practically drag Vanessa out, her heels scraping against the floor as she resists. She's still screaming as they lead her away, her voice echoing down the hallway. "You can't do this to me. I deserve that apartment." Brian doesn't even look at her as she's being dragged out. He's too busy watching his wife Olivia talk to the Bar Association representative who just showed up. no doubt making sure they have all the evidence they need to end his legal career permanently. As they're leading Vanessa out, I hear one of the court officers mutter under his breath, "These gold diggers are getting worse every year." I have to bite my lip to keep from laughing again. The guy has no idea he's just witnessed the most spectacular backfiring of a gold-digging scheme in judicial history. It's been 6 months since that beautiful day in court. A lot of you have been DMing me asking what happened after, so here's the full aftermath of the situation. First up, let's talk about Brian Thompson, the scumbag lawyer himself. Remember how the judge referred him to the Bar Association? Well, turns out this wasn't his first rodeo with them. 3 other complaints had already been filed against him for ethical violations, but those cases got settled quietly with some backroom deals and probably a fair amount of money changing hands. Not this time. The Bar Association's investigation found a total of 12 cases where Brian had helped wives fraudulently transfer property before divorce. 12. My boy Jack had found 3 in his initial investigation. Olivia's lawyer found 7 more, but this dude had been running this scam for over a decade, perfecting his technique with each new victim. Last month, they officially revoked his law license permanent disbarment, not just a suspension. He can't ever practice law again in this state. After spending years exploiting the legal system, he's now been cast out of it entirely. But wait, it gets better. Remember Olivia, his elegant wife who made that dramatic entrance into the courtroom? She didn't just divorce him, she absolutely destroyed him in the proceedings. Turns out Brian had been hiding money in offshore accounts for years, skimming from client settlements and stashing cash for his eventual escape plan. Olivia's lawyer, an absolute savage who clearly knows how to follow the money, found everything. She got their mansion in the suburbs, his collection of BMWs, the man had 3 apparently, all their joint accounts, and even his precious golf club membership that he'd bragged about at parties. But the real cherry on top? The DA's office is pressing criminal charges against him for his role in all those fraud cases. My case was apparently the straw that broke the camel's back, the one that finally brought enough attention that the authorities couldn't ignore his pattern of behavior anymore. Last I heard, Brian's living in a studio apartment in the not-so-nice part of town and working as a paralegal at some tiny law firm that was the only place willing to hire him with his newly tarnished reputation. How the mighty have fallen. From $500 an hour to fetching coffee and making copies. Karma's a beautiful thing. Now for Vanessa. Oh boy, where do I even start? Remember how she violated the prenup in 3 different ways? That meant she got nothing from our divorce. 0, zip, nada. No alimony, no property, no settlement of any kind. But that was just the beginning of her problems. The DA's office didn't take kindly to her little forgery scheme. They charged her with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, attempted theft, and filing false documents with government agencies. She tried to play the victim card in court, crying about how Brian manipulated her, how she was emotionally vulnerable after problems in our marriage. News to me. How she'd made a terrible mistake and just needed a second chance. The judge, a different one this time, but apparently cut from the same no-nonsense cloth as the divorced judge, wasn't buying any of it. Vanessa got 18 months of probation, $50,000 in fines, and 500 hours of community service. Plus, she now has a felony record that'll follow her forever, coming up on every background check for the rest of her life. Her real estate license? Gone. Revoked by the state board faster than you can say fiduciary responsibility. Turns out having a fraud conviction isn't great for a career that requires honesty and integrity when handling other people's property and money. Her fancy real estate agency, the one with the glass offices downtown that she was so proud of, fired her the day after the conviction. They even issued a press release distancing themselves from her actions, which has to sting. But karma wasn't done with Vanessa yet. Remember her dad, the big shot real estate developer who insisted on the prenup? He was a major player in the local real estate world, always helping her get those premium listings and connections that boosted her career. When he found out what she did, not just the cheating, but the fraud and theft attempt, he cut her off completely. Apparently, he was genuinely disgusted by her behavior, telling mutual friends that he didn't raise her to be a criminal. 2 weeks ago, I'm at the gym, still making those gains. Hit 405 on bench last week, a new personal record. And guess who walks in? Vanessa's younger sister, Catherine. We were always on good terms during the marriage. She was the normal one in the family. She tells me Vanessa's living with their mom now. working as a receptionist at a dentist's office since no real estate firm will touch her. The designer clothes and BMW are long gone, sold to help pay the legal fines and attorney fees. The best part, according to Catherine, Vanessa tried to beg her dad to help her pay the fraud fines, pulling the daddy's little girl routine that had always worked in the past. His response, which Catherine quoted with obvious satisfaction, "You made your bed, now lie in it." Harsh, but fair. As for me, life's pretty sweet these days. The apartment's value has gone up 25% since all this went down. The Chicago real estate market is on fire right now. I did some renovations, painted over all traces of Vanessa, replaced the furniture she'd picked out with stuff I actually like. Jack helped me refinance it legitimately, and I actually got an even better rate than what Vanessa was trying to get with her scheme. Work's going great, too. I got promoted to senior site supervisor, and I'm now running multiple projects simultaneously. The crew loves hearing updates about Vanessa and Brian's downfall. It's become something of a legend on our construction sites. The story of how the blue-collar guy outplayed the crooked lawyer and his gold-digging girlfriend. But the real win? 2 months ago, I'm at this new gym, had to switch after getting too many DMs from guys at the old one wanting to hear the whole sordid story, and I meet this girl named Jessica. She's a physical therapist who works with injured construction workers, loves lifting weights, she squats more than most guys I know, and actually thinks what I do for a living is impressive rather than something to be embarrassed about at parties. We've been dating for a few weeks now, and it's going really well. She's everything Vanessa wasn't. Honest, straightforward, appreciates what I do for a living, and get this, she actually reads the documents she signs instead of just looking for where to put her signature. The other day, we drove past Vanessa's mom's place while heading to a restaurant, and I saw Vanessa struggling with grocery bags, wearing sweats and looking rough. Jessica didn't know who she was, but I did. I didn't say anything, just drove on, but it feels good, man. Real good. The moral of the story: don't try to screw over your spouse, especially through fraud and deception. Karma has a way of finding you, and it's often much harsher than anything you were trying to inflict on others. Prenups are important. Read them carefully before you sign, and understand that they work both ways. And always, always have a good lawyer in your corner. One who's as thorough and intimidating as Jack. Oh, and lift heavy at the gym. You never know when you'll need both the physical and mental strength to deal with life's unexpected challenges. Unless your wife's trying to steal your apartment, then ego lift away. Sometimes a little extra confidence is exactly what you need. Edit to answer questions. For everyone asking about Jack, yes, he's still my lawyer and close friend. And yes, we still train together at the gym 3 times a week. The man's an absolute beast with both legal documents and deadlifts. He's actually started taking on more fraud cases since mine, specializing in catching spouses who try to hide assets during divorce. Says it's more satisfying than regular divorce law. He gets to be part lawyer, part detective, as he puts it. Edit 2. For everyone asking for gym tips in my DMs, seriously guys. Consistency and proper form trump ego lifting every time. Focus on progressive overload, eat clean protein, and get enough sleep. It's not complicated, just difficult to maintain over time. Discipline beats motivation in the long run, kind of like how methodically gathering evidence beats an emotional confrontation when dealing with a cheating spouse. Final edit, Jessica says hi to all of you. And yes, she's read this whole saga from start to finish. Says I'm a better writer than I give myself credit for. I think I'm going to keep her around. She has good judgment. Keep her, right? I want to thank everyone for the supportive comments and messages. Sharing this story has been somewhat therapeutic for me. While I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone else, I'm actually grateful for it in a strange way. It showed me what I'm made of when pushed to the limit, and it freed me from a relationship that clearly wasn't built on honesty or respect. Life has a funny way of working out sometimes. A year ago, I thought I was happily married to someone who loved me for who I was. 6 months ago, I discovered it was all a lie. Today, I'm happier than I've been in years, with a better job, full ownership of my home, and a new relationship built on mutual respect rather than deception. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted is the only way to find what you actually need. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who try to screw you over end up screwing themselves instead.